Hi, welcome to lesson 4. Today we'll be learning about your first 3 jazz chords, and these are the major 7 chord, minor 7 chord, and dominant 7 chord. So if you recall in the previous lesson, we learned that a major chord contains the first, third, and fifth tones of a major scale, and a minor chord contains the first, flat 3, and the fifth notes of a major scale. Now today we're going to extend that concept towards 7 chords. Now these are different types of chords, and just as the same as major chords and minor chords, the type of chord tells you which notes of the scale to play. Now 7th chords and their variations are what make jazz sound like jazz. If a song sounds jazzy, it probably contains a 7th chord in it somewhere. And so essentially a 7th chord means that we are adding either the 7th or the flat 7 tones of a major scale to the chord. And there are 3 types of these 7th chords that I will teach you today. So I've written out the structure of the 3 different types of 7 chords on the board here. There is the major 7 chord, and the major 7 chord requires that we play the root note, or the 1, the 3, the 5, and the 7. These tones together make up the major 7 chord. I taught you that a major chord contains the 1, the 3, and the 5. Now we're calling it a major 7 by simply adding the 7th tone of the scale to the chord. The second chord is the minor 7 chord, and it follows the same theory as the previous one. We have the 1, the flat 3, and the 5, and these 3 notes alone make up a minor chord. Now that we call it a minor 7, we're essentially just adding the flat 7 to the chord. Now it's also important to note that the 3 and the flat 3 can also be called the major third and the minor third respectively. This is simply a different way to express the space between the notes of a scale. So we have the major third and the minor third. And similarly with the 7s, we can call the 7 a major 7, and we can call the flat 7 a minor 7. Now in this series I will use these terms interchangeably, but I think the easiest way to understand this is to just call it a flat 3 or a flat 7 and a 3 and a 7. So far we've learned the major 7 chord, which contains the 1, 5, major 3, and major 7. We've learned the minor 7 chord, which contains a 1, a 5, and a minor third and a minor 7. So with major chords we play all the major 3 and 7s. With minor 7s we play all the minor 3s and minor 7s. Now the dominant 7 is a mix of these. It contains the root note, or the 1, the major third, the 5, and the minor 7. So obviously you've probably noticed by now that all of these chords contain the 1 and the 5. So really the only thing that changes between these 3 chords is whether we play a major third or a minor third, and whether we play a major 7 or a minor 7. So I'll go ahead and circle these numbers on the board. So in terms of what these chords sound like, the major 7 chord sounds like this. So it sounds a little bit happy, but still a little bit gloomy at the same time. And in comparison to a major chord, which sounds like this, by adding the 7 to the chord, we actually add a little bit of blues to it. Now the minor 7 chord sounds like this. And it sounds pretty sad. But still not as sad as a normal minor chord. And that's because we've added the extra flat 7 to this chord to add the extra flavor. Finally, the dominant 7 chord sounds like this. So you may have heard chords like this perhaps in gospel music, and definitely in jazz. This one's a little bit more neutral in terms of being sad or happy. Now, as you may have guessed, there's also a 4th kind of 7th chord that I won't cover in this video because it's rarely used. And you can get that simply by taking the last possible combinations of 3s and 7s, which is if you take a minor third and a major 7. And what that is they simply call it a minor major 7 because the 3 is a minor and the 7 is a major. Now, there are also different ways to write these chords. You might see the MAJ7 stand for major 7, but people may also write it as delta 7, or capital M7. These all mean the same thing. I prefer to use Maj 7 because it's the most straightforward. Another way to write the minor 7 is with the lowercase m, followed by a 7. And as well, some people use the minus sign. That works too. And then in terms of the dominant 7, we usually just write the number 7 with nothing before it. So if you see, for example, the chord G7, G7 simply means it's dominant because it has no other symbols beside it. Finally, I have to note that the plus sign doesn't mean minor, it means something else that's more complicated, and we may cover that in a later video. So now I'm going to teach you how to play each of these 3 chords. For each of the 3 chords, I'm going to teach you 2 different ways to play them, and you'll see why later. Note that all of these chords that I teach are transposables, so that means you can move them up and down the fretboard for different keys. And also note that you may have to mute some of the strings with your fingers. So the first way to play the major 7 chord, I'm going to call this pattern A, is if we place our if we place our root on the 6th string, or the bottom E string. So for example, if I play an A major 7, then I will put one of my fingers on the 6th string on the E, F, G, A, on the 5th fret of the 6th string, of the bottom E string. And from that, I'm going to draw my pattern. So the pattern will be up on the screen, and it goes like this. So from where I have my root, I'm going to put 2 fingers on the middle 2 strings, 1 fret above that fret, whatever that fret is, and then I'm going to place another finger on the 2nd string, on the same fret as the root, and then I'm going to mute the other 2 strings so that they don't play. And once again, the pattern is up on your screen. Figure out where to put your fingers in the most comfortable way. I personally like to put my thumb on the bottom E string. And this is optional, but that way also I can place my index finger on the 1st string, 1 fret down. And that gives me an extra note to play. Now, as I mentioned, a major 7 chord contains a 1, 3, 5, and 7. And so I'm playing the 1 on the bottom E string, and then on the 4th string, and then on the D string I have a 7, so this is my 7. And then on the G string I have a 3. On the 2nd string, or the B string, I have a 5. And then on the high E string, the 1st string, I have an extra 7 if I want to play it. And so this last 7 is optional, just because I already have a 7 on the D string. Now you might be thinking, how am I supposed to remember where the 1, the flat 3, the 5, and the 7 are? I'm going to put a diagram on the screen just to show you all of the different tones that you can play relative to the root. So as long as you define where your 1 is, this diagram shows where all of the other tones are relative to that 1. So if you need to play a flat 3, for example, you just look up the diagram and find where it says flat 3, and then you play that note. Obviously there are multiple positions with the same number. So this is useful because if you can't reach a certain position, then you can just try for the other position that has the same number. My notes don't have to be in this order. They can go 1, 5, 3, 7 or 1, 5, 7, 3, whatever is the easiest to do if you want to make up your own chords. So another way to play the major 7 chord, and I'm going to call this pattern B, is to put your root note on the A string, or the 5th string from the bottom. And so if I place my root anywhere on the fretboard, I'm going to choose D, which is on the 5th fret, so I'm going to play a D major 7 because I placed my root on the D. And then from there, the pattern looks like this, and it's on your screen. So this pattern looks sort of like an upside down Y or a lambda symbol. Mute the outer 2 strings, so the bottom and upper E string. Optionally, you may choose to bar your index finger across the 1st through 5th strings of the guitar, and that will give you an extra note on the high E string, which happens to be a 5. So once again, I have a major 7 chord consisting of a 1, a 3, a 5, and a 7. And so if I go to listen to my notes, I have a 1, 5, 7, 3, and an optional extra 5. So one last thing before I move on is that the reason I'm teaching both patterns A and B are so that it's easier for me to move around the fretboard if I need to play any given major 7 chord. For example, if I am asked to play a major 7, which has its root on the 5th fret of the E string, so like this, and then all of a sudden I'm asked to play a D major 7, which if I was to keep the same pattern, I would have to move all the way up to the 10th fret. So the 10th fret is a D on the E string, and I would have to play it up here. I would have to play the same shape up here, and so that's not very convenient, which is why instead of moving up here, I can just play the D major 7 on the next string. So I shift from here, the 5th fret, to a D major 7 starting on the A string, and the 5th fret of the A string is a D, so if I play my D major 7 here, I don't have to jump around as much. And these are both major 7 chords, so this makes it very convenient. So in the same way, I'm going to teach 2 patterns for the minor 7 chord. A minor 7 chord with its root beginning on the E string looks like this. And this one is the simplest. It's simply all of your fingers are on the same fret, and you're muting the A string and the high E string. Now if you want, you can also play the high E string on the same fret, but that's difficult to do because you only have 4 fingers to use. Or you could put your thumb on the bottom E string and bar the other 4 strings. And that will give you an extra 1 tone. So to review, a minor 7 chord contains the 1, the minor 3rd, 5, and the minor 7. I have here a 1, a flat 7, flat 3, and a 5. So this makes it a minor 7 chord. Now if I want to play a minor chord with its root on the A string, then the pattern looks like this, and it's on your screen. So if I bar all of the notes except for the E string, I can play an extra note on the high E string. And so for minor chords, once again we have 2 patterns that look like this, pattern A and pattern B. So the last one is a dominant 7, and once again I'm going to teach 2 patterns. Pattern A starts with the root on the E string, and it looks like this. And then if you want to play the dominant 7 chord with the root on the A string, then it looks like this. Once again, there's an optional note. If you choose to bar with your index finger, then you can also play the note on the high E string. So that's a dominant 7. And once again, it contains the 1, 3, 5, and flat 7. One final thing I want you to notice is that these chords actually differ by very little. If anything, the difference between a major 7 and a dominant 7 is simply 1 note. We move from the 7 to the flat 7. Similarly, the difference from a dominant 7 to a minor 7 is only 1 note. We shift from the major 3rd to the minor 3rd. And this is actually reflected in the shaping of our patterns, because if I was to play a minor 7 chord with the root on the E string, it looks like I've put all my fingers on the same fret. And if I play a dominant 7, all I have to do is I have to move one of my fingers from a flat 3 to a 3. And I can do this by moving the finger on the G string. And then similarly, if I want to go from dominant 7 to major 7, all I have to do is move one of my fingers from flat 7 to a major 7. So in this case, it would be the D string. Obviously, you might have to shuffle your fingers around, but it's really that simple. And all of my other notes stay the same because they're shared between all the chords. So I'll end this lesson with 2 songs that you can practice. The first is Havana, and it contains only 3 chords. And all of these 3 chords happen to be 7 chords. So the first chord is a G minor 7, so I'm going to play that on the A string. And so that's going to be on the 11th fret here. The second chord is a E flat major 7, and I'm going to play that on the E string. And the last chord is conveniently a D dominant 7. So I'm going to play that with the root on the 6th string or the E string, and that's here. So it goes like this, and it's only these 3 chords throughout the whole song. Now if that's too high, you can also shift it down. I prefer to actually play it a bit lower, down to maybe an E minor. E minor 7 and the C major 7, and then a B 7. So it looks like this. Havana, na, na. Half of my heart is in Havana, na, na. He took me back to East Atlanta, na, na. Half of my heart is in Havana. There's something about his manners, Havana, na, na. Now the second song that I'm going to teach is Fly Me to the Moon by Frank Sinatra. Once again, this song contains all minor and major and dominant 7 chords. There is one extra chord that I haven't taught you yet in this song, but perhaps you can just learn the extra pattern as you go, and we'll learn more about that chord later. So it goes like this. So the first chord is a G minor 7. This is based on the root on the A string. So it looks like this. The chord is on your screen. The second chord is a C minor 7, and this is with the root note on the E string. So it looks like this. The third chord is a F dominant 7, so it looks like this. And then the next chord is a sharp major 7 or B flat major 7, same thing. It's based on the E string. So I'm going to play it like this. And then the one after that is a D sharp or E flat major 7, so it looks like this. And then the next one, we haven't learned this yet, but if you can just follow the chord diagram on the screen, it shouldn't be too hard to learn. And this is called a minor 7 flat 5. And then we have a D dominant 7, or a D7 for short. And then a G minor 7. And then back up to the C minor 7. And then the F dominant 7, or F7. And then B flat major 7. And then we have, once again, the E flat major 7. And then we're back to C minor 7. And then the F dominant 7, or F7. And then B flat major 7. And then to transition to the next verse, we'll play an A minor 7. And then this one's optional, but you can play a D7 flat 9, which is also new. And then it repeats back to the beginning, so G minor 7 and so forth. So it sounds like this. then the second verse is pretty much the exact same, except the ending is a little bit different. So we start off with the same chords. So really the second verse is more of the same stuff, except we end differently. And what I'll do is I'll post all of the chords on the screen so you can follow them as you practice. To end the video, I'll also have a short clip of me actually singing to the song. And so hopefully you'll be able to follow along eventually. Also, just a quick note, it's always easier to finger pick these jazz chords simply because there's strings you have to mute and you're only playing maybe 4 or at most 5 strings at the same time instead of 6. So strumming it doesn't sound as good, although you can still do it. It's still definitely doable, but it's harder. And so that's all for this video. We're not done with these 7 chords yet. In the next video, I'll teach you actually how to use them and when to use them. Because today all we've done is we've learned how to play them and what they sound like. But you'll find that these actually come in very useful in many different situations, and you'll learn all about that in the next video. So until next time, just keep practicing, and I hope you learned something from this video.
Fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, baby, kiss me. Fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore. You are all I long for, all I worship.